I'd like to introduce Jason Craig and Champsy. Now, Champsy is so famous that she just goes by Champsy. Okay? The what? The real reason is I've worked with Champsy for over 25 years and I still can't pronounce her name right. And so it's just better to go with the famous Champsy. So let's start with Jason Craig. Jason is a board-certified behavior analyst and has worked with children, adolescents, and adults with autism and intellectual disabilities in both the public and private sectors. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Florida. Go Gators, made me say that. And a master's in educational administration from the University of Scranton. And he holds a postgraduate certification in autism spectrum disorders from VCU. And is about to finish his doctoral degree at Nova Southeastern. And he's currently Grafton's Director of ABA Services. Pretty impressive. Champsy has been at Grafton for over 25 years. She's a board-certified behavior analyst as well, working with children, adolescents, and adults with autism and intellectual and cognitive disabilities. She has served as the senior consultant at the Virginia Autism Resource Center and is considered an innovator in developing effective and promising treatment interventions for individuals with special needs. And Champsy is the Director of Behavioral Consultation at Grafton. Let's welcome them both.
Once upon a time in Japan, long, long ago. Oh, sorry. Nobody thought that was funny. Okay. Thank you, Kim. And I want to thank Shweta for putting this together. I think this has been wonderful. So everybody give Shweta a hand. So I know that she's been working some long hours getting this place ready and getting the presenters together and a lot of coordination. And so you and your team, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to talk about a little bit about ABA and a trauma-informed mold. And then following just a brief overview, Champsy's going to go into a yes perspective, and you'll see where that kind of fits in. A lot of what we'll talk about today fits nicely into a lot of the presentations that we've talked through today. So I hope you enjoy this information. I will not make you get up, dance, put glasses on, or anything like that. I will probably embarrass myself at some point in this presentation. Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Okay, so our objectives, we're going to define trauma-informed care, which I don't think I have to do now. And then we're going to talk about applied behavior analysis. We're going to show how trauma-informed care considerations can be incorporated into the practices of ABA, introduce functional behavior assessment, and provide insight into what Champsy is coining the YES practice, which I think is a wonderful intervention that hopefully you guys can take with you to shape some of the things that you guys are doing. So, trauma-informed care. So it's appreciation for the high prevalence of traumatic experiences. That's 78% that Dr. LaBelle was talking about. That's potential for our individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's thorough understanding. So it's those 3 R's, which I like how she put that into perspective. It's to recognize, to realize, and to respond. And that goes hand in hand what we're going to be talking about as we look through the MABCs of behavior and where TIC fits into each of those different components of learning theory. And you know, one thing I want to, because it's all fresh, the understanding of the neurological, biological, psychological and social. Think about what Bonnie just did to you. You know, think about the physiological response that you had just to that one incident. You know, that one event heightened you. If you experience that on a day-to-day basis every day, as Janice showed us, we would, you know, those would form some of the neural pathways in our brains and give us that heightened response much quicker. So trauma-informed care, you know, I think you guys have gotten a good dose of it, and hopefully I can show you where it fits into ABA. The big T traumas, we define them by big T's and little t's. Big T's are probably the ones that most of us are very familiar with. Sexual, physical, severe loss, the domestic violence, terrorism, disasters. The ones that aren't so common are these little t traumas. And I want you guys to read through this list pretty quickly. And, the last two are something that we've touched on today. The restraint seclusion can be traumatic for an individual, can be re-traumatizing for an individual. Bullying, very prevalent, especially with an autism population. Repeated failures, shame, social isolation. You get some of your other ones, motor accidents, alcoholism, multiple placements, multiple caregivers. Think about Jerry, Terry, Jerry, Terry. See, I did that to myself. Think about Terry. That social situation was very complicated. Fits into a lot of these different categories. And so now I want to get into applied behavior analysis. So it's a science. It's a science of behavior. Tactics are derived from the principles of behavior, and we'll get into some of those principles of behavior. We're looking at improving socially significant behaviors through experimentation used to identify variables responsible for that behavior change. So what things are responsible for the behavior change, and how can we manipulate those to get the behavior change that we want? So our 7 principles, and as you read through them, nothing excludes incorporating other disciplines. So I'm saying that we can incorporate a trauma-informed care mindset, a mold into applied behavior analysis, because I think it meets a lot of these. It's applied, it focuses on behavior. You're looking at analytics, technology, conceptually systematic, effective generality. I think there's a lot of research in TIC right now, trauma-informed care, and I think she actually used the one I liked a little bit better. The trauma approach, and I like that. So I think it breaks down a little bit. So there's many implications in ABA. So we have a lot of momentum in the autism spectrum disorder population, intellectual and developmental disabilities. It is widely used. It's used educationally. It's been deemed medically necessary. And as we move forward at Grafton, and I know Scott had alluded to some of our ventures, we're looking also to see how we can apply some of these concepts to the elder population as we move into the dementia care and things like that. So I think taking on a trauma-informed care mindset, a trauma-informed approach to applied behavior analysis, the implications that we can have can reach multiple different populations. So in general, learning history. You think most people hear ABCs of behavior. I like to throw an extra component in here. It's motivation. So motivation, an antecedent, a behavior, a consequence, and then you get some learning. Okay, and that's just operantly how we learn in our environment. There's a respondent side, but I think even those responses can be conditioned to be more on the operant side of things. So the considerations for trauma-informed care can be found I'm going to go through 3 of these areas. Shamsi will kind of get into the consequences of it. But we're going to look at motivation, we're going to look at antecedents, and we're going to look at consequences, because the behavior in itself is what we're observing. So when you go into how can we incorporate trauma-informed care into this learning, there's a proactive and a reactive approach. So the proactive approach would be that motivation. It's going to be that antecedent. The reactive approach is going to be your consequences. How do you respond when you see those behaviors? So you got to consider in those situations the traumatic effects of what you do. Now, some things you may know, and some things you may not know. And as we get into more of the specifics of maybe some motivation and antecedents, you'll see some of those things that you may not know. But as you become proactive, as you learn, because we all learn as we serve the individuals that we work with, that we can be trauma-informed even if we don't start that way. So effective intervention operates on 2 levels, and this is from Hodas, individual physiology. So this is the arousal, the self-regulation that Janice was talking about earlier, and then the context considerations to avoid aversive stimuli. Now, things can be aversive on both sides of the equation. Okay, antecedent-wise, you can have an aversive stimuli. Consequence-wise, you can provide an aversive stimuli. And those are where we want to try to avoid. So trauma-informed care is, and I think, it was mentioned earlier, it's a universal precaution. And this is a good analogy. I want you guys to read through this real quick and see where it sits with you. So ADA put forth laws to make things disability informed. Not that all of us are disabled, but when we come into a building like we came into today, are there handrails? Are there wheelchair ramps? Is there braille on the signs? There are things within our environment that has made these buildings that we frequent in public disability informed. So why wouldn't we make the treatment, whether it's ABA, whether it's CBT, whatever it is, why wouldn't we make that trauma informed just based on the possibility that an individual has experienced some of the traumatic events that we've heard about today? So this is a good analogy that I think it really puts it into perspective. Like, why wouldn't we do this? There is no reason why you wouldn't try to avoid adversive stimuli, whether it's on the front end or the back end of certain behaviors. So I want you guys to take that with you and think about it as you go through, the doors to certain buildings. Like, what can we do differently as others have done differently in the environments that we frequent? So if we think about trauma-informed ABA, it's a treatment model that's systematically applied, so similar to the definition I provided. But there's an understanding that there's value-altering neurological, biological, psychological, and social variables that affect behavior change. Okay, and what that means is if somebody's hyper-aroused, if somebody's in fight, flight, freeze, are we going to do a lot of learning? No, there are value-altering variables. There is a response that puts somebody someplace that may not make them open to learning at that point in time. And we need to understand that. Okay, so let's look at those three components that I talked about. So motivation. Motivation is a continuum. It's a range. It ranges from deprivation to satiation. Deprivation means you need it a lot. Satiation means you got it a lot. You don't need it anymore. Okay? And typically you might see something like this, like the bars. They got it figured out. That's why they put peanuts on the bar for you. It creates motivation for thirst. They give you salty foods. You eat it. I need something to drink. They got it figured out. So that's a simple everyday context. But then think about what it would do to an individual if they don't feel safe. So what if their single motivation right now is to feel safe because they've been through so many different traumatic events in their life? Dr. Spencer, your activity brought back, I had a class I taught last night, and we were talking about interviews and just functional interviews that the students were doing with caregivers. And somebody brought up a 15-year-old girl that they were working with and started talking about her, self-injurious behavior. She was a cutter, all this stuff. And everybody's like, oh, it's attention-based, things like that. And then she says, well, 2 years ago she was raped on a date. And then, whoa, it flips a switch. Like you start to think differently, which to me, you could see the people switch. And they weren't being trauma-informed to start. They were looking at just the behavior and say, it's just attention-seeking. She's, personality disorder. But then once somebody brings an extremely traumatic event into the mix, then you start to think, maybe we need to treat this a little bit different. Similar, a 6-year-old, self-injurious behavior, a lot of eye pushing and head hitting and things like that. It was a 6-year-old. We later find out that this young man is in a wheelchair. It was neurologically typical 4 years old, had a cardiac arrest because of a traumatic event in his home. CPR for 10 minutes. Heart came back. Now has lost most of his skills. And they were talking about, the behavior is just to avoid the work tasks. And then you get to a little bit more. So these individuals in these contexts, think about the motivation for those individuals just to feel safe, to be able to communicate, to unlock the ability for somebody to communicate when they haven't been able to communicate, solve some of that level of deprivation, which then you can really start to teach that individual. You can really start to put antecedents in place that'll trigger the response that you want so you can reinforce those and really have behavioral change. Okay. So level of motivation. It's important ongoing assessment. And you'll see as we get into the antecedents, there's 3 types of antecedents. You're going to have your neutral stimulus, which isn't attached to anything. Like nobody really knows. What that's going to do to the individual, and then the consequence comes, and whether it's adversive or not, or reinforcing or not, then they start to differentiate. We'll have a condition, things that signify that reinforcement is coming, and I call these condition fun people, or that's my example. Our ABA folks, we call them condition fun people, because I want them to signify to an individual that they're about to, learn and have fun, or have fun and not know that they're learning. So those kind of things, they're conditioned. It's a stimuli that signifies, okay, we're about to have some reinforcement, we're about to have some fun. And then you have what's, something that signifies that punishment is coming. So a conditioned aversive stimuli. So through repeated exposure with punishment, certain things start to gain what's called stimulus control over that individual. So you'll start to see that in the presence of this individual might have a physiological response and start to prepare for what they know is coming. Or depending on the magnitude, it might be, one thing that happened to that individual that we don't know about. And this is, the 22-year-old stepfather that Dr. LaBelle talked about. Well, the person that sounded like the 22-year-old stepfather. That would be an antecedent that signified to that individual a very traumatic event, which threw them, through the amygdala, an inappropriate response because it never made it to the CEO of the brain, those kind of things. The heckled 12-year-old girl, those, that heckling, that whisper from the therapist, those were things that were antecedents, that were conditioned as aversive stimuli that signified there's something bad coming, so you need to fight, flight, freeze kind of situation. So think about the 2 levels of intervention. We have our individual physiology and then the context considerations, and you have to learn to start to manage your stimuli in your environment. So you want to be able to choose things that that individual is going to respond well to and is not going to throw them to a situation where you might be in a fight, flight, freeze kind of situation. So some fun examples, because we all do generalize as well. So in this situation, anybody ever been, and I hate to ask this, anybody ever been bit by a shark? No, okay, good. Scott. All right, for somebody that might have a close encounter or something like that, whenever you see this shark like this, it might give you, just like Janice showed the brain pictures. When you're writing about a traumatic event, you could still fire in those same places. So this might signify something, but it could also pair up with something like this, to where this has been maybe a conditioned reinforcer. Somebody likes this cartoon show. So you can generalize. So you just never really know if something is going to scare that individual or make them happy. So that's where we kind of learn as we go as well. So these antecedents. Now this is where it goes bad. So here's another example. Okay, so everybody knows who this is? Yes, please. Some. I don't want to date myself too bad. Yes, I got some. Okay, so this is a scary movie. Everybody's familiar with it. And so this individual might give a good response, right? When you see him, you're like, eee, right? Now, other individuals that look similar to this individual might come up and try to serve this person. God, I can't believe I put that. It's huge. And so this antecedent, my sheer presence, could have elicited a similar response as that previous individual. And so I have to be cognizant of what I do in the space of an individual that I'm trying to serve. Because I could, just by my sheer presence, be adversive to that individual, and I have never done anything to that. Our history of learning, the antecedents that are in place when a behavior gets its consequences, which in sometimes is adversive, will relate back to me, or something that looks like me, or something that looks like this guy on the left. Okay, so some potentially traumatic triggers. You might think of some of these. Bedtime. Why would bedtime be potentially traumatic and we wouldn't think about it? Sexual abuse. Okay, good. What about room checks? What happens behind closed doors? There's potential for physical abuse, those kind of things. Large men, here comes the heavy kind of situation. I think it was Janice that was talking about the pound for pound kind of thing. Let's hire the biggest, baddest people. Yelling at people might bring, domestic violence, divorce thoughts, your parents. People too close. Individuals with autism don't like people close anyway. But being too close to an individual, I don't like people in my purple bubble. So I have to respect that for others. And then you get into consequences. So we've talked about on the front end, we've talked about some of the things that we can do to be trauma informed. Pay attention to motivation. If an individual is thinking about safety and needing to communicate and getting their basic needs met, that's what they're going to be motivated for. So they're not going to be motivated to do maybe a worksheet. So I want you to think about that. Antecedents, when you manipulate and manage your stimuli in your environment, look for things that could be adversive. And if you find out they are adversive, choose other things. Don't continue to use things that are going to be adversive to that individual. And then when you get to the consequences, that's how you respond. So there are going to be situations where we will have to respond. We can't do everything on the proactive, preventative side. We can try everything possible, but there may still be situations where we have to respond. And those consequences, now, ideally, it's replacement behaviors that you're reinforcing, but if it's negative behaviors, you want to make sure that you're using things that are not potentially traumatizing or re-traumatizing to that individual. So think about the two levels of intervention that we talked about. So you got the physiology, so their arousal, the self-regulation. What are you going to do there that might throw them into a hyper-aroused state where they're just focusing on self-regulation? But then things like Scott alluded to earlier, the UKERU, the least resistance approach to crisis management that we've came up with as an organization that's been extremely successful, where we don't have to use physical interventions to intervene in a crisis situation. So that's a trauma-informed way in order to respond. And then we get into things like the yes practice, which it's time for Shamsi. No, go ahead. We'll take them at the end. So this is Shamsi. So thank you, guys.
Hello. I wish I had come here earlier. I did come, but I didn't see the crowd. So it's a kind of nervous thing here. All day we have been talking about trauma. And the fact, I think Janice was talking about up to 98% of individuals who are receiving some sort of treatment are assumed to have experienced some sort of trauma. But here at Grafton, that's the assumption that we make, that we treat everyone as though this is a universal precaution, that everybody has experienced some sort of trauma. But let's say somebody has been lucky. Everything has been perfectly fine in their life. but because of their difficulties, because of challenging behaviors, they end up at a place like Grafton. As nice as we are, as kind as our staff are, we are not their home. So guess what? They experience their very first trauma, being away from home, being in place surrounded by strangers, okay? We cannot even imagine how it feels to be away from home, to live in a group home or at a training center. Do you agree? And we also know that the number one reason that these kids are removed from home and placed at a treatment center or at a group home somewhere, the number one reason is their behaviors. Yes? They come to us not because we have to teach them ABCs or algebra, because the schools can do that. They come to us because nobody can deal with their challenging behaviors. All right? So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about those behaviors, trying to understand what those behaviors mean, and come up with one little solution for all of us. We all know that behaviors, adaptive or maladaptive, have a function. This means anything we do it for a reason. Someone tell me something you do for no reason. Anybody? Do you know someone who does something for no reason? Yes? No? Nobody? I will tell you about Lisa later. And we also know, so thank you for confirming that anything we do, everything we do, all of us and all of individuals with disabilities, everything we do it for a reason. And here at Grafton, we also work under the assumption that at any given time, everybody wants to do their best. Do you agree? That we all want to do our best. Whatever task we are given, we want to do our best. And we don't want to say that individuals with autism or other disabilities are any different. They want to do their best. So when we see them being challenged and not making progress and exhibiting those challenging behaviors, we make it our responsibility to find out why. Why is it that they're stuck and they're not making progress? And we work very hard to find out the answer to that why. So we can help them, we can teach them in hopes that they will also do their best. At Grafton, we often get calls. I would say once a week at least, I get a call from a family member who says, I have a child with autism who bites his hand. How can I stop him? A mother calls and says, my child with disability pulls his sister's hair. How can I stop him? Or someone would call and say that my 16-year-old daughter with disability smear feces all over her room. How can I stop that? And my answer is usually, I don't know. Because the behavior, the topography, the shape and form of the behavior gives me no information as far as why the person does what he does, okay? What we are interested in is the function of the behavior. I share a little story with you. Many years ago, I was asked by a mother to go to her home where she was homeschooling her children. She had a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old had autism, and she also had a baby. And she said she had major difficulty teaching her 5-year-old and managing his behaviors. So I got there at 8:30 in the morning, knocked on the door. The 5-year-old opened the door for me. I said, good morning, you are Mikey. And he said, "Shut up." And he spat on my face. His mother came over, took him away. There was a hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was a red chair. She placed him there and said, "You sit here for 5 minutes. What you did was wrong." Later, I joined them in the kitchen. That's where she was holding her classroom, and she was teaching her sons. And she gives them assignment. The 10-year-old one assignment, the 5-year-old who was extremely intelligent, an assignment. The 10-year-old says, "Mom, this is too much. I cannot do it all." And then she says, "Okay, honey, here." She folds the paper in half, and she says, "Okay, do half of it." The 5-year-old takes the piece of paper with all these math problems. He looks at them, and he throws them away, and he says, "Shut up," and he spits on our faces. Mom takes him again to the back of the hall, places him on that chair, and says, "What you did was wrong." Another 5 minutes. And then she tells me that when she had taken him for an evaluation at Kluge, the psychologist said, "You are such a smart boy." And he did the same thing. He said, "Shut up," and he spat on his face. And there were other occasions like that. And she said, "I have read about behavior management, and I know that I have to be consistent." And guess what? She was consistent. Every single time she took him to that red chair for 5 minutes. So at the end, what I told her was that although the behavior looked identical, every single time he did the same thing, but every time he did it for a different reason. When I told him good morning in the morning, he had no idea how to greet a stranger. He was confused. He did the only thing he knew how to, which was shut up and spitting. When the psychologist gives him a compliment, he has no idea how to respond to a compliment. And I'm pretty sure that you all agree with me that individuals on the spectrum, we have to teach them how to respond to a compliment. They do not understand, they do not know. We have to teach every single thing. And then when the other brother was able to negotiate and get a reduction in the assignment, our 5-year-old didn't have the skill to negotiate. He didn't want to do it. He did the only thing he knew how to, which was throwing the papers. So what I told her was, number one, you have to get rid of that chair. Because I was afraid that in the future, anytime he saw a red chair, he would tantrum, because that can be traumatic for him as well. And then we decided to analyze every incident and see why he did what he did. The topography was the same, but he did it for different reasons. We decided to teach him how to greet others when somebody comes to the door. So it was very easy. Back then, we are talking about 15 years ago, there was no video modeling. And of course, I was not smart enough to invent it myself back then, but we did use video modeling for him. We videotaped his brother opening the door for someone, and we made it very easy to learn. And we said, the brother said, "Mom, somebody at the door." That's it. We wanted for him to learn it just like that. And then she prompted him, and he learned how to do that. So with every single difficult situation that he was experiencing, we came up with a skill to teach. And mother called me a couple of weeks later that there was no timeout anymore, and he was doing beautifully. So it is very important for us not to come up with a procedure and use it as a blanket for behaviors that look the same, because they mean different things. We also believe that challenging behaviors, and I would say all behaviors actually, do not occur in a vacuum. They occur within an environmental context. Okay, we respond to our environment. And we also believe that for any behavior, there is an identifiable antecedent. I'm sure you have heard that he does it out of the blue. I'm sorry. But we know that nobody does it for no reason. We just agreed on it, didn't we? If we missed the antecedent, we just have to say that we missed it. We cannot claim that he did it out of the blue for no reason. There was a reason for that behavior. And we all believe that the consequences are what weakened or strengthened the behavior. What happens after the behavior has impact, direct impact on the behavior happening more or less in the future. Something that I forgot to do was, first of all, to apologize for my accent, and second, to please allow you to ask questions anytime that what I'm saying is not easily pronounced. So what do we do? So if you are not coming up with a prescription for these behaviors, what do? We have to find the function of the behavior. We use functional behavioral assessment. Anybody here who is not familiar with it or has not heard of it? Functional behavior assessment? That is wonderful. Everybody has heard at least about it. We use it as an approach that we use different type of strategies to gather information about the behavior, about the person, about the history of the person, about the experience of the trauma that the person may have had in the past. We use that. We interview everyone who knows something about the child. Okay? It's important for us to focus on identifying the traumatic experiences in the past. We do that in hopes and in order to come up with a treatment approach to change, to replace that behavior. And the good thing about it is that it goes beyond just the symptoms, okay? It finds the actual cause, the answer to that why. Because if we don't, if we just look at the child who is doing bad behaviors, we are dealing with a bad child who does a bad behavior, who is subject for punishment, and we know punishment is another source of trauma. We do functional behavioral assessment because for any challenging behavior, there is a functionally equivalent behavior that we can identify and teach. Again, I'm going to repeat myself. If we don't do that, then we are dealing with a bad child with a bad behavior who has to be punished. Another reason that we do functional behavioral assessment, what it does for us, we avoid pathologizing the behavior. Janice was talking about it this morning, that is not this sick person doing these sickening behaviors. That's not it, okay? We are dealing with a person who is missing skills, okay? It's an individual who is missing some skills, and as a result has learned those behaviors that have served him some function in the past, all right? And it also demystifies the behavior. It doesn't matter how bad, how often the behavior is, how severe it is, how involved it is, it just doesn't matter. It's a behavior that has a reason, and we can go about finding the reason for that behavior and teaching the replacement behaviors. Why do the problem behaviors happen? I want to say that is the question for all behaviors. Why do we do what we do? All right? We do it for those reasons. Everybody loves attention. Do you agree? Everybody loves attention. And we all know how to get attention. We know what I can do to bring a smile to my supervisor's face. I know that, that's attention. I know how to make a nice dinner to make my guests appreciate me. That's attention, isn't it? And the behaviors happen either for attention or for avoidance. Remember in Mikey's case, when he threw away the paper, the assignment, what was the function for it? It was avoidance, it was escape. He didn't want to do it. He didn't have the language to say, Mom, this is too much, give me less. The only way he knew how to was throw it and say, shut up, and then he got away with it, all right? And for attention, another example that I forgot to share was that as Mom and I are talking, he doesn't have the language to say, Mom, leave that lady alone, get her out of here. He didn't have that ability. He didn't have the ability to say, Mom, I am your son, I need you, come here, hold me. He didn't have it. So instead, he spat on our faces and he told us, shut up. He wanted attention. And guess what? He got it. Because Mom took him all the way to the back of the hall on that chair and spent some good one-to-one. Although it was not a pleasant one-to-one, but he got the attention, and that's what he wanted. Automatic, there are things that we do to make us feel good, okay? There are kids who do this if left alone. We used to have a student, we have this student, he used to do this. He used to do this to the point that caused him to have seizures. It bothers my eyes. Because if he was left alone, if he was not engaged and having fun, he would create something for himself to make him feel good. And we have been told that people who are about to have seizures is a good feeling, that it's a good sensation that they feel. I don't know, I don't have seizures, so I don't know. But that's what we hear, that he did it because going into the phase of having a seizure was a good sensation for him, all right? And sometimes we work to get the money, we work to get the money and use the money to buy things that we want, all right? So anything we do is because of those reasons. Did I miss anything? Is there anything that anybody does for a reason different than that? No? I was not planning to, but I'm going to share a true story that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was visiting home, and there was this discussion about altruism. Do I say it correctly? Altruism? Okay, good. And I was saying, as a behavior analyst, I don't believe that there is such a thing as altruism. That anything we do, anything a human being does it for herself or himself. And my brother, who is an elder guy, and he is very religious, spiritual, okay? He thinks he knows God. He was telling me that he was challenging me. He was saying no, that over the summer, he practices Islam. He said over the summer, for 1 whole month, he fasted. He and his family fasted. That means they suffered so much because the days were so long and it was so hot, so they didn't have anything to eat or drink for up to like 17 hours. And he said there was no selfish reason in it. I said, yes, there was. And I asked him, I told him that you did it either because you wanted love from God, you wanted God to love you more for suffering, or you were doing it because God has told you to do it, you believe that God has told you to do it, and you're afraid, and you're doing it to avoid punishment of God. And you can just imagine where that conversation can go. But I told him, you know what? I don't have to suffer. I don't have to fast, but I believe God loves me too. So that was I had to stop it because it was going a little too far. So, anybody, any question about these reasons why we do what we do? Yes, ma'am. Pleasure is automatic. We do it because it makes us feel good. Yes? I share another story with you. My daughter said a couple of weeks ago she was going to get lunch, and as she was driving to go to the restaurant to get something to eat, she saw an older man who had a sign that said, "No job, no money, hungry." She said she went to the restaurant, got herself a sandwich, and got him a sandwich too. So she took it to him and said, "Here, I got you lunch." Why do you think she did it? She saw someone suffering. She bought him a lunch. Why do you think she? To make her feel good about herself. And Jason and I were talking about it. There is a possibility, I don't know what her intention was, but there is a possibility that seeing someone hungry while you are about to eat is painful for some of us, yeah? So there is a possibility that she did it so she could enjoy her lunch better, all right? It has to do with intention, all right? Do you get it? So she could have done it because that made her feel better, or she did it to avoid the pain of watching somebody else suffer. So anyway, she said she took the sandwich to the guy, this older guy, and he took it and said, "Honey, I cannot eat this. I have no teeth." And then she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. What can I get you?" He said, "A six-pack beer." And she said, "I'm sorry, I cannot do that, but here is some cash. You do go whatever you want to get for yourself." So whatever we do, as you said, for pleasure, we go watch a movie for pleasure, yes. We call to ask someone, how is that person doing? Because that makes us feel good, yes? Do you agree? What do you mean, genuine concern? You can. You know what? It's not. She is not fun. It's escape, because if you do it, if you don't do it, you feel guilty, don't you? Yes. Exactly. So it's escape. Okay. Sometimes we do things that we don't have to, that we hate to do, but we must do, because otherwise we either get punished by someone or we feel guilty for not doing it. That was a very good example. Thank you. Okay, so yes, ma'am. You know what? There hasn't been just one case like that. There are many cases, so there is no procedure for. In order for me to tell you what to do, I have to listen to the story. I have to listen to who this individual is not what is wrong with her, but what has happened to her. And that was something that I got from Janice's talk this morning. What has happened to her? Why is she doing this? Okay, what is it? For smearing, I can come up with different theories. One would be boredom. There is nothing exciting going on. And for like 2 or 3 year olds, toddlers, you see that they will like to play with the mud and things like that. It's sensory. So there is a possibility that everything is so boring, there is nothing for her to do. She creates something with her own body. Remember about the guy who was doing this? There was nothing that environment could provide him to keep him occupied, so he was using his own body to get a good sensation. There is that possibility. And we had, for example, a case that I was dealing with not long ago, that right before they were going to go shopping, this young man who is very well toilet trained had a toilet accident and he had smeared everywhere. In that case, he was doing it on a timely manner to avoid going shopping. What happens in that case is, you're not ready, we are not taking you. So he gets what he wants, which is not going shopping. He doesn't have the language to say, I do not like to go shopping. And sometimes staff may assume that since I love shopping, everybody else that I work with, they love shopping, so they have to go. Does that make sense? And there is a possibility that was avoidance. The first one was sensory. There is a possibility of if he's left alone and nobody is paying attention to him or her, and there is no reinforcer going on, and he or she wants the attention, she does that to get the mom to come and yell at her and say, do not do that, why did you do this, you have to clean it. You know, there is no procedure, there is no prescription for the topography of the behavior. We have to get the function. And please remember what I remembered from her talk is not what is wrong with you as an individual, but what has happened to you in your life. Sure. Okay. As I know, most of you are educators, psychologists, speech therapists, somehow involved in dealing with our folks and also their behaviors. When we do functional behavioral assessment, we ask, tell us what happens, what causes him to have a tantrum, what causes him to bite his hand, what causes him to run away, tell us. And the most common trigger is reported to us by teachers, by parents, as being told no. Do you agree? When you tell your teacher, your student no, they bite their hands or they do whatever behavior that they know how to, okay? So the most common trigger, the most common antecedent causing the challenging behavior is being told no. How do you feel? I like to get some ideas from it. This is what I came up with, but how do you feel? How do you feel when you are being told no? You ask for something and you are being told nope. How does it make you feel? Have you ever been told no? It's a challenge. What does that mean? We don't like it. Nobody likes to be told no. No, and we very quickly we look at how to ask it again in a different way so we get the yes. All right? Or we try to negotiate. We try to justify our request. We don't take no for an answer. Not every time, not immediately. We look for alternatives. Our kids, our folks know if they ask one staff says no, they go to another staff. If the child goes to mom, ask for something, mom says no, he goes to dad, yeah? Sometimes we let it go. We use those defense mechanisms, all right? Are you guys familiar with them? When we are being challenged, when there's an obstacle that is going to make us feel bad, guess what? We have those defense mechanisms that we use, that we blame the person for it, and we say, you know what, I will prove it to you. I will prove it to you. You didn't give it to me, it was your loss. Okay, you didn't agree with me, it's because it was your loss. Or somehow we try to use those kind of defense mechanisms. We withdraw, depression, okay? We get angry, argue, or fight. Most of our folks that we work with do not have the top skills. They don't know how to negotiate. They don't know how to go and come up with a question in a different way to justify the request. What do? They argue and they fight, yeah? So we are introducing the yes practice. Yes practice does not mean that when a child or adult or someone you are working with asks you for something, you say, oh, yes, ma'am, here, I'll go get it for you now. It's not giving into the demand of the person, but it is acknowledging the request, providing the request. Is as someone is asking me for some water, of course, I immediately give it to him or to her. And if the request is not possible, I will support the person to understand when, how, under what circumstances, and even if the request is possible, okay? Yes, practice provides opportunities for the person to problem solve. And we learned today over and over that our folks who have been traumatized, the number one skill that they are missing is problem solving, all right? So we teach them how to get it. The yes practice implies that I like you, I care for you, I hear you, you are important to me, I want to help you, and I will do my best. That doesn't mean I am going to give in to your demand, but no. But I want you to feel good about yourself. I want you to feel that I care for you, that you are someone who is heard, understood, and will be supported. A few months ago, there are 3 real-life stories that I'd like to share using this yes practice. A few months ago, one of our ABA students, this kid, we provide services at home. When I was doing some parent training session and I introduced the yes practice, the father said, nope, I do not like it. He said, my child has to learn that no means no. And it is my responsibility to teach him that no means no. So I asked him to tell me, give me an example of what is going on. He said, it's about 5:30 in the evening. My wife is cooking, dinner is almost ready, and the 7-year-old kid with autism, he was 6 at the time, the 6-year-old with autism comes and says he wants a cookie. Of course I'm going to tell him no. So I said, okay, then tell me what happens. He said he will tantrum, he will throw himself on the ground, tantrum, bite, kick, until I restrain him and take him to his room, until he calms down. And then he comes downstairs and we will have dinner. So I asked him to consider this. Child comes to you, dinner is almost ready, and he says he wants a cookie. Instead of saying nope, say, wow, cookie, that sounds great. I love to have one too. Let's go see what kind we have. Get the plates, get the cookies, and set the table and tell him dessert is ready. And we teach him dessert, and that's a concept that our ABA therapist taught him, that dessert comes after meal, okay? He didn't have to give the cookie immediately. All he needed to do was acknowledge and support the child. He called me a couple of weeks later and he said, not only the restraining and tantrum is gone, the son every day is involved in setting the table and choosing the dessert for the family. This is another kid, I think he's 11, extremely intelligent with autism, and they live out of town. It's like 10, 15 minutes to a grocery store. And mom was saying that if he finds something, if he wants something, let's say he asks for his favorite cereal, and if we don't have it, he's going to become violent and extremely aggressive. So I either have to deal with his violent behavior when I tell him no, or I have to drop everything, drive 10 miles, get the cookie, and get the cereal and bring him. So what we decided to do was, instead, when he asks for it, we teach him how to write down the list of the items that he needs. Instead of saying, no, we don't have it, no, you cannot have it, instead say, let's write it on the shopping list so we will not forget to get it tomorrow. But meanwhile, let's come up with something different. And that boy now is in charge of completing shopping lists for item he wants and item that the other family members in the house need and want. There was another, this is another case. Do I have time, Shweta? This is happening again. It was my youngest niece. Last year, she came home and she said that she had got her permit to drive. And she asked me, when should I start looking for it? I said, for what? And she said, brand new car. And then she reminded me that when she was a little girl, I had promised her when she gets her license, I will buy her her car. So I wanted very much to say, are you out of your mind? No way. I am not crazy to buy you a new car. I didn't get my first new car until when I was like 30 years. And that was like a couple of years ago. And I wanted so much to say, no, that's not real. But instead I said, come and sit with me. My little girl is driving now. And then I gave her a speech about brain development. And I said how old the person should be before one's brain is fully developed. And I came up with the age 22 then. I don't know what it is. So, and then I said, when you don't have the experience and when your brain is not fully developed yet, you will have lots of bumps and little accidents. And you don't want that to happen with a brand new car. So before you know it, she agreed to save her money during the summer job that she had, and for her parents and I to give her more money so she can buy her first new used car. So, and she was very happy with it. So we do that for our loved ones. I couldn't have the gut to tell him, nope, you're crazy. I couldn't. We do that with our family members, with our loved ones, but sometimes we forget about the folks that we are working with, okay? We find it easy to say no to those kids. And if there is a lesson to be taken, I'm hoping that we use the yes practice as a tool for any trauma-informed milieu, not just for trauma-informed milieu, not just for kids with autism, for anyone that we are interacting with. Because it's a good feeling to be understood, to be heard, and to be supported, okay? This is all I have, but Jason is coming up to answer all of your questions.
No. Does anybody have any questions?